Mia was adjusting her apron and looking at the clock above the counter in the diner when Clint Eastwood came and sat in her section. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. It was almost 7 p.m., which was when the dinner rush usually started to slow down, allowing her to wind down her shift at a more relaxed pace. For most people, the little diner, which was located off the highway, was just a place to stop and grab a meal before continuing on their way. At 28, Mia was balancing long hours at work with raising her 6-year-old son, Jordan. Every paycheck and every tip went toward paying for their modest apartment and the growing list of school supplies that Jordan needed. She moved gracefully from table to table, her warm smile a shield against the exhaustion that was clawing at her. The regulars were familiar with her story, or at least parts of it. A few of them would give her an extra dollar or two when they could. But Mia never asked for sympathy. She had learned early on that the world wasn't fair, and her only option was to keep moving forward. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Mia's attention. She looked up, expecting to see another road-weary traveler. Instead, a man walked in with a quiet confidence. He wore a plain button-up shirt and jeans, and his weathered face was partially obscured by a hat that he had pulled low. It took her a moment, but when he glanced in her direction, she immediately recognized him. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. Her breath caught in her throat. She was not the type to fawn over celebrities. She did not have the time or energy for it. But this was different. Clint Eastwood was a legend. Mia remembered a person her late father used to talk about while they watched old westerns together. For a brief moment, memories of those times flashed in her mind, but she didn't have time to dwell on them. Clint settled into a corner booth, and Mia knew it was her turn to serve him. But this wasn't just another customer. Something about his quiet presence made her heart race. Mia grabbed her notepad and pen. She took a deep breath and walked toward the booth. As she got closer, she noticed the subtle details. His hands were slightly weathered but steady as they rested on the table, and his piercing eyes were hidden beneath the brim of his hat, seeming to see everything without giving much away. He looked up as she stopped beside him, his expression calm and almost unreadable. "Good evening," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. He took a quick look at the menu before putting it down and asked, "What can I get started for you?" Mia wrote down his order, which was just a burger cooked medium rare with no onions and a coffee. It was simple enough, but she couldn't help but notice the slight shake in her hand as she turned to leave. Clint's voice stopped her. "Busy night?" he asked. She turned back to him, surprised. Most customers didn't bother with small talk. She replied with a faint smile. Unless they were regulars, it wasn't too bad. He nodded, his expression softening just a little. "You've got a good pace. It's not easy to keep up in a place like this." She blinked, unsure of how to respond. Was he complimenting her? Clint Eastwood, a man she had only ever seen in movies, was noticing her work ethic. She was able to muster a polite smile before retreating to the counter to place his order, but her mind was racing with questions. Why was he here at this tiny diner off the highway? He could afford to eat at the fanciest restaurants in California, yet here he was, sipping water from a chipped glass and waiting for a burger like any other traveler. When the order was ready, Mia carried the plate and coffee to his table and set them down carefully. He gave her a quick look of appreciation. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome," she replied, trying to sound casual, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this ordinary interaction, was somehow different. As she moved to serve other tables, she noticed that he was taking his time eating. He sat there looking almost contemplative. He was sipping his coffee every now and then, but something about his presence made her feel like he was there for more than just a meal. She couldn't shake the feeling that this night was anything but ordinary. Mia kept herself busy by refilling coffee cups, clearing tables, and taking new orders, but she couldn't help glancing toward Clint's booth every so often. He was eating slowly. He seemed to have all the time in the world, and every now and then, their eyes would meet, and he would give her a polite nod, a silent acknowledgement that made her stomach flutter. After finishing his meal, Clint gestured to her with a slight raise of his hand. Mia wiped her hands on her apron and walked over, careful to keep her expression composed. "Everything all right?" she asked. He said with a small smile, "That was one of the best burgers I've had in a long time." She chuckled lightly, surprised by the compliment. Well, I'll let the cook know. He'll appreciate hearing that. For a moment, Clint didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and in that brief silence, he seemed to be looking at her with a kind of curiosity that made her feel vulnerable, but also strangely understood. You've got a good energy about you, he said at last. You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. Mia blinked, unsure of how to respond. Was this a compliment? A memory? She couldn't tell. Thank you, she managed to warm her cheeks. I just try to get through the day like everyone else. He nodded, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite place. That's the trick, isn't it? Just getting through. Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills, which he placed on the table along with a folded piece of paper. Keep the change, he said as he stood up, and read this when you get a moment. Mia's heart raced as she stared at the note. Thank you, she said quietly, not sure if he heard her as he walked toward the door. The bell above the door jingled as he left, and just like that, he was gone. For a few moments, she stood frozen by the booth, staring at the note as if it might burn her fingers. What could he have possibly written? And why did he seem so intent on her reading it? Those questions would have to wait, though, because there were still tables to serve, and Mia was not the type to leave her duties unfinished. Even if her mind was racing with anticipation, by the time Mia cleared Clint's booth, the diner had quieted down, and the last of the evening's customers were sipping their coffee. She was chatting softly, and the jukebox was humming in the background. As she finished cleaning the table, she picked up the folded note with trembling fingers and slipped it into her apron pocket. She wasn't sure why she felt so anxious. It was just a note, right? Once her shift was over, Mia slipped into the back room to collect her things. Her curiosity finally got the better of her. She carefully unfolded the paper and scanned the first few lines with her eyes. Her breath caught in her throat. Dear Mia, I don't know much about you, but in the short time I've been here, I've seen something rare, true resilience. Watching how you manage this place with grace, even under pressure, is a reminder of how much strength exists. In the everyday heroes of this world, you remind me of someone very dear to me, someone who taught me the value of hard work and kindness. I don't know your story, but I can see in your eyes that you've carried more than your share of burdens. That's why I want to do something, no strings attached. Mia's hands began to shake as she continued reading. I'm leaving a small gesture for you to use. However you see fit, whether it's for your child, your future, or simply a moment of rest, I hope it brings you some peace. People like you deserve to be seen, and I see you. Folded inside the note was a check. Mia's heart nearly stopped when she saw the amount, $10,000. Her knees buckled, and she sat down hard on the bench in the back room, tears streaming down her face. However, it wasn't just the money that changed her life. It was the words, the acknowledgement, and the feeling that someone as accomplished and legendary as Clint Eastwood had taken the time to notice her and care for someone who often felt invisible in the world. It was overwhelming, but even as she tried to process it all, one question remained. Why her? Mia sat in the back room for what felt like hours, her mind swirling with emotions. She thought about the bills stacked on her kitchen counter, the second-hand sneakers her son Jordan had been wearing for months, and the leaky faucet in their tiny apartment. The check in her hands felt surreal, like something out of a dream. What was she going to do with this unexpected gift? She was unable to afford to fix this, and while the money could have made a significant difference, Clint's words continued to echo in her mind. You remind me of someone very dear to me. Who was that person? What had made Clint Eastwood, of all people, see something in her? It wasn't just the money or the note. It was the way he had looked at her, with a kind of respect and recognition. Mia wiped her tears away and took a deep breath. She hadn't felt this way in years, and she knew she couldn't keep it to herself. So she called her best friend Tasha, who had been her rock through countless struggles. Within minutes, Tasha was at the diner, sitting across from Mia in one of the empty booths. Wait, Tasha said, holding up her hands as Mia handed her the note. Mia nodded, her eyes still swollen from crying. I don't even know why I didn't do anything special, she said. Tasha read the note silently, her eyes growing wider with every word. When she reached the check, she let out a low whistle. Girl, this is insane. Do you know what this could mean for you and Jordan? I understand that Mia said her voice was barely above a whisper, but it doesn't seem real to me. Why would someone like him care about someone like me? Tasha reached across the table and grabbed Mia's hands. Because he saw you, Mia, she said. He saw what I've seen all along. You work harder than anyone I know, and you never let life break you. People notice that kind of strength. Mia looked down at the check, feeling both grateful and doubtful. What if I don't deserve it? What if this is some kind of mistake? It's not a mistake, Tasha said firmly. You do deserve it. The question is, what are you going to do with it? But that was the question, wasn't it? And as much as Mia wanted to celebrate, Mia sat at her kitchen table long after Jordan had gone to bed. The note and check were laid out in front of her. The small apartment was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old pipes, and the dim light above the table flickered faintly. Her thoughts were racing in 1,000 different directions. This money could pay their overdue rent. She couldn't ignore the weight of this unexpected gift, or the responsibility that came with it. She replaced the unreliable car she had relied on and gave Jordan opportunities she had only dreamed of until now. However, as exciting as the possibilities were, they also frightened her. She picked up the note again and read Clint's words for the 10th time. I hope it brings you some peace. People like you deserve to be seen, and I see you. Those words resonated with her more than she had anticipated. She had spent years trying to keep her head above water, working double shifts and skipping meals so that Jordan could have enough. She had pushed herself to the point of exhaustion so many times that she had lost count. Through it all, she had felt invisible, as if the world did not care whether she succeeded or failed. But Clint Eastwood had seen her. He had seen her struggle and her determination, her resilience, and in that moment, she realized this wasn't just about the money, it was about believing that she was worthy of something better. Mia thought about her father, who had always been her biggest cheerleader before he passed. He used to say, "Don't let the world wear you down, kid. You've got a fire in you for the first time in years." She felt the fire flicker again. She took out a notepad and started writing down ideas for things she could do with the money that would create lasting change. Perhaps she could finally take a class in accounting, a career she'd always dreamed of, but had never had the time or resources to pursue. Maybe she could set up a small college fund for Jordan, giving him a chance at a better future. But one thought kept returning louder than the rest. Clint's gesture had changed her life, and she couldn't ignore the idea of doing the same for someone else. Still, she felt uncertain, and the road ahead felt overwhelming. But for the first time in a long time, Mia allowed herself to hope. Morning sunlight streamed through the window as Mia stood in the kitchen. Mia was sipping a cup of coffee and watching Jordan play with his action figures on the worn-out carpet. The check and note were still resting on the table, now folded neatly after a sleepless night of reflection. She had made her decision. She called Tasha first, who immediately offered to watch Jordan for the afternoon. Explained that she needed some time to sort things out, and Tasha didn't ask any questions. She just said, "You do what you need to do, girl. I've got you with Jordan," happily settled at Tasha's house. Mia drove to the bank. The check felt heavy in her purse, its presence almost too surreal to believe the bank teller. A young woman with a bright smile raised an eyebrow. When she saw the amount, "That's quite a deposit." The teller said. Mia nodded and gave a small smile, her tone polite but curious. "It's a gift." The teller didn't ask any more questions, and Mia felt a small wave of relief as the check cleared. She felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, excitement, and an almost overwhelming sense of responsibility. This money wasn't just for her, it was a chance to rewrite her story and give Jordan a better life after leaving the bank. Mia made her way to a local community college. For years, she had walked past its campus, wondering what it would feel like to sit in a classroom again to learn to grow. She stepped inside, her hands trembling as she approached the admissions desk. A kind-faced woman greeted her and asked how she could help. "I'd like to enroll," Mia said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "In accounting," the woman smiled warmly. "You're in the right place. Let's get you started." As Mia filled out the paperwork, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known in years. This wasn't just about her anymore. The purpose was to demonstrate to Jordan that it is never too late to pursue your dreams. regardless of how unattainable they may appear. However, as Mia exited the admissions office, a new idea occurred to her. What if this was just the beginning? What if Clint's gesture was not merely a present, but rather a catalyst for igniting a much larger flame? Weeks turned into months, and Mia's life underwent no changes. She was balancing her shifts at the diner with evening classes at the community college, and while it wasn't easy, she was determined. Jordan noticed this, and he would proudly tell his friends, "My mom's going to college." Mia couldn't help but smile every time she heard it, but Mia was not only interested in changing her own life. Inspired by Clint's gesture, she began to set aside a portion of her money to create a small fund to help others in her community. Whether it was a single parent who was struggling to buy groceries or a student who could not afford textbooks, Mia quietly stepped in to help, giving back in the ways that Clint's note had encouraged her to do. One evening, while Mia was flipping through her accounting textbook at the kitchen table, Jordan pulled on her sleeve. "Mom," he asked with his big brown eyes full of curiosity, "do you think that man will ever come back to the diner?" Mia paused, caught off guard by the thought. Would Clint Eastwood ever return? She didn't know, but she would always carry the impact he had on her life. "Forever, maybe," she said softly while ruffling Jordan's hair. "But even if he doesn't, he's always going to be part of our story." And that was the truth. Clint's gesture had reminded Mia of the power of kindness, of seeing someone for who they are and lifting them up when the world felt heavy. It had reignited her belief in herself. Mia closed her textbook and got ready for bed that night. She felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time, she was not just surviving, she was thriving, one step at a time. So the next time a stranger entered her section at the diner, Mia welcomed them with the same warmth and grace, knowing that even the tiniest contact can impact a person's life forever. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the capacity to generate ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. If this story resonated with you, remember to subscribe, then give it to someone else. Someone could need some motivation today.